Hello, everyone. Welcome to Musing, music for the adventurous listener, coming to you right here on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary and on all major podcast platforms. My name is Yana Saylor. Thank you so much for joining me for this hour of music and conversation. Today's episode is the first of a two-part series dedicated to the life and legacy of Canadian composer Violet Archer. Archer was born in 1913, and over her lifetime, she became one of Canada's most influential and pioneering composers, whose music combined lyricism and intellect with deep humanity. Over her long career, she composed more than 300 works, taught generations of Canadian musicians, and became a cornerstone of the nation's classical landscape. This year marks the 25th anniversary of Archer's passing, but her music and influence continue to live on in the Canadian music scene. Today, I am in conversation with Leah Ploude-Archer, Violet Archer's great-grandniece. Leah is a Montreal-based writer whose recent children's book, Violet's Path, The Melodious Life of Violet Magistrelli Archer, brings her remarkable life story to a whole new audience. Through vivid storytelling and musical imagination, Leah celebrates her great-aunt's enduring legacy, a life dedicated to creativity, resilience, and the belief that music connects us all. So welcome, Leah. So happy to have you with me today on Musing. Thanks so much for being in conversation with me. What is your relationship to Violet Archer?
Yes, so I am her great niece. She was my father's aunt, and so I got to meet her a few times before she passed. She passed in 2000 and I was 13 years old, so I had the chance of meeting her a few times before that. She was the legendary Aunt V.
I bet, I bet. So, what was your awareness of your Aunt V growing up, and what did your family say about her? What was your experience of her in your young life?
So I knew that my father and his sisters were very, very proud of her. We had a bunch of memorabilia in our house, like a poster of her festival, which I always thought was so cool that she had a festival in her name in the 80s. And we did have some records and a bunch of little trinkets that she sent to us over the years. But I thought her music was quite intimidating for a teenager. And I had always kept that idea up until recently that her music was hard to listen to for some reason. But yeah, she lived far away until like 98. She was in Edmonton and we were in Granby around Montreal. So we didn't get to see her that much. And I know I visited her once when I was a baby in Edmonton, but I have no recollection of that. I have photographic proof, but that's it. Other than that, we would talked about her a little bit. Once in a while, listen to music, hear, oh, they're talking about her on CBC. Oh, how cool is that? But that's, what it was. And when I met her, she was getting older, so her memory was a bit gone in some ways, not for everything. She remembered her music and previous lives, but she would forget who we were. So as a kid, I thought that was kind of weird, but now, of course, I understand it. So that
Mhm.
was my relationship with her. I always thought she was the cool aunt that was kind of a legend, like I said, because she was far and my father spoke of her fondly, but we didn't get to see her that often in that way.
What kinds of things were you told about her? And would you go and hear her music performed as you were growing up?
No, never, because I think for a while it wasn't like it was played, but not as much in it was played, but not as much in Quebec. Even now it's changing, but they played it a lot more in Ottawa or in Alberta because I guess there's like kind of a divide between the cultures of Francophone and Anglophone music worlds, unfortunately. And even she has mentioned that herself in archives that I found. So, anyways, yeah, I know that my aunts have heard her music played live many, many, many times in Ottawa, especially. But no,
Mhm.
I had never heard it. A little bit on the radio, the CDs that have been made by CBC, we listen to them once in a while. And I remember even my dad was like saying, oh, it's very modern. He loved the music, but he wasn't necessarily knowledgeable about classical music that much. So that's what we kept it like that. I now realize that I would have enjoyed it had I known more about it.
Tell me about your family. Is it a musical family or was she kind of an anomaly? Was she someone that was totally unique?
She was an anomaly in a way. So her father, Cesare Balestreri, because she was Balestreri before she was Archer, he did work at a restaurant close to La Scala in Milan. And so he loved opera. He loved music. He would listen to a lot of it. So she was exposed to it as a child. And even when she lived in Italy for a few years as a very young child, like between the ages of about 1 and 6, and she heard a lot of music around her, but none of her relatives played it.
Hmm.
They were more intellectual. So they pushed curiosity and knowledge, not so much music. So when they realized that she liked music and instruments, they decided to get her a piano eventually when she was about 8 or 9 years old. But no, there were no other instruments at home. They would listen to a lot of music. And I remember her reading that they would go get around the radio and listen to the operas every Sunday or Saturday. So she had memories about that. But yeah, other than that, no others. And even some of her nieces and nephews did play a little bit of music, but no other professional musicians.
That's even more extraordinary that she became as accomplished and acclaimed and is now the grandmother to generations of composers. It's really astonishing. You just never know how someone will come to be and develop into the person they're meant to be. For folks that are familiar with perhaps her professional life and her music, can you give us a little bit of background on like her family story or family history? And you mentioned earlier that Balestreri was their previous last name. Can you just give us a little outline of her life?
Sure. So her parents, my great grandparents, Cesare and Beatrice Balestreri, I think Beatrice was Azzi, if I'm not mistaken. They met in around Como, Italy, in the north. And so they decided around 1912 that they were going to come to Canada for opportunities. They had an adventurous spirit, from what I heard. I mean, the conditions were not great economically, but it wasn't so much that they were running away from something. It was more that they were looking for opportunities. So they had heard that Canada was an interesting place to go. So the two older brothers, Violet's two older brothers, were already alive, my grandfather Fernando and their brother Giovanni Bruno. So the parents decided to come to Canada and they left the little boys behind with the grandparents for a while until they settled. And then Beatrice got pregnant with Violet when they had arrived in Montreal. So Violet was born in Montreal and they were going to go back to get the boys not long after. Violet and her mom were already in Italy coming to get the boys, and World War I started. So they got stuck there for 5 years.
Okay.
And Cesare was alone in Canada working different jobs as a pastry chef and in restaurants. But anyways, that's the Italian family they were there until 1919. And then Violet and her mom were able to come back to Montreal. and the boys were left behind once again. But then a few months later, they joined the family. And so that's when the Balistreri family was all together for the first time. And then finally, like Violet and her brothers could start going to school in French and in English and getting settled in Montreal in that era. And Cesare kept working in restaurants. And then they had a younger sister named Carolina who was born in Montreal and when Violet was about 9 years old. And so Violet started working a little bit. She decided she was going to go to university. Her parents were not initially very supportive about that. I don't think they did anything to block her. I know her dad wasn't very happy with that. He was a bit more traditional, but at the same time, intellectual. So he was reticent, but not like angry at her that much.
So just for context, what year was this? Like this
Oh,
was
yeah.
probably very early on for women to be attending university. That was probably not the norm at this time, right? Like when was this?
So I think she started in 1930.
Okay.
So right in the Great Depression. So that's another point that made it more complicated for her to attend university was that the economic situation was terrible. Her dad didn't have a job. So he said, if you want to go to university, you have to pay for it yourself. I can't help you.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be extremely difficult as a woman in this situation right now that we're having where there's no work. So yeah, she ended up teaching piano to kids and she would take on a bunch of contracts, like accompanying different musicians. She would work and work and work to be able to pay for her university at McGill. She was accepted at McGill because she was a very good student. And so that was the era, and her parents were not very supportive, but they weren't like completely against it either. I think they were worried, especially when she decided to become a composer, because they said, I mean, female musicians had a hard time back then. They wouldn't have space in the orchestras. Very few were the orchestras that would accept women, let alone composing.
Yes, and female composers are still underrepresented
Yes.
to this day. So to think back to then, the obstacles she would have had to overcome, it's just tremendous. Where do
Yeah.
you think this drive to make music and become a composer came from?
Well, from what I've read and talked to my aunts and people that knew her better, it came really, really young. She had to be very creative because when she was growing up, especially in her childhood in Italy, she was alone a lot. She was
Hmm.
left alone a lot because her brothers were older. They knew each other better because they hadn't, they'd grown up without her for a few years. And so her mom was busy probably working or doing things to help the family survive because they didn't have a lot of food. So she would just spend hours and hours like sitting on the balcony at the piazza in Como and just like looking at things around her and composing music in her head already. So
Hmm.
I don't think she ever asked herself the question that much. She just felt it in her very, very profoundly. And as soon as she got a piano and started studying all the different instruments that she could, it was never even a question. It
Right.
just came to her like that. And she felt it. She kept on with it and found ways to. She realized that she also liked teaching. So it wasn't like a chore for her, that it was something that she would be doing on the side to just fund her passion of composing. It was something she also liked. So
Hmm.
very quickly, as far as I've heard, there was no like questioning that she would be doing something else. There was no question that she would do something else with her life ever.
It was inborn and
Yeah.
meant to be. So you have written a children's book entitled Violet's Path, The Melodious Life of Violet Ploude-Archer. So what was it that compelled you to write this? And why do you think children can learn from this? And what do you think they'll take away from hearing her story?
So it's a mix of things because I'm already interested in writing books for children, for a young audience. I've written a few personal projects that were meant more for my family. And I was always planning on becoming a professional author for kids' books and adults' books too, but that's another subject.
Mhm.
But yeah, so eventually I clicked. I was like, wait, Violet is an interesting subject. I knew a lot and not a lot about her. It's like I knew the basics, but then when I started diving into her archives, I realized that there was so much more about her life that I didn't even realize had happened and that she had experienced. And I collect kids' books a lot. I have 600 maybe at home or something like that. I have two kids, so it's not just for me. And one of my favorite genres is biographies of important, interesting people presented for kids because I find that it's nice to have role models and not just always the same ones too. Like, it's
Mhm.
good. I like going back and diving into past people who've been kind of overlooked in their ways. Like Violet was recognized in her lifetime, but there's still a lot of people who don't know about her, whereas she has had a huge impact, much more than even I had realized.
Mhm.
So I thought her story was so cool in that she didn't get married, she didn't have kids. It was kind of her choice because she said she would have liked to have kids maybe, but it wasn't possible in her life. She had only 24 hours like we all do in her day. So anyways, so yeah, I thought she was a great role model in that she was stubborn, but also brave, loving, generous, bright, daring, like all these things that can be so inspiring and can present how complex a person can be in life. And I found that there was a way of presenting this to children that would be very positive and
Mm.
could be a good role model, even for children in this era. Because
Yeah.
she went through a lot of hardships, but she never let it like block her from her objectives, her
Yeah.
dreams.
Well, she didn't have time for kids because she was too busy smashing glass ceilings and
Mhm.
taking
Yes.
down, barriers, like one of the very first trailblazers in the composition world and the music world in general. But I think it's so extraordinary. I was talking to one of our associate composers, and they said, Violet Archer, I think of her as my musical grandma because, I studied with so and so who studied with her directly, and, I heard about her a lot. I studied her scores a lot. And so it's like instead of having her own children, maybe she's now, she has dozens of children in the musical world.
Yes, especially towards the end of her life when she was retired as a teacher from university, because she taught for a long time at Edmonton. And so she began teaching children. She took on a lot of children as students, and she found it really important to create like an interest in classical music and music in general, but mostly classical music for children. She thought it was very important for her that kids, the next generations, would continue being interested in this, in music in general and in creation. And so for me, it was another point of, oh, this should be a kid's book
Yeah.
because I know how important it was to her. And she composed a lot of music for younger musicians too.
See, from a young age, I discovered the beauty of music. The sound of a violin made me cry, but it wasn't that I was sad. Instead, I was overcome with emotion from the lovely music. My mom brought me to see the opera, and I loved to listen in on the neighbor playing piano. When I had a bit of free time, I would sit on the balcony of the hotel where we lived and invent songs based on the sounds I heard and the things I saw. Finally, as the war came to an end, my mother and I sailed back to Montreal, once again leaving my brothers behind. This time, however, they only had to wait a few months before they were able to join us. Just a few months later, they would embark on a journey across the Atlantic Ocean, traveling by themselves to join us in Montreal. In December 1919, the Magistrelli family was living together in a modest apartment. Our father was a waiter at a busy restaurant, and on his days off, he would cook wonderful meals for us. I helped by washing the mountains of the dishes he left behind. Often, we would gather around the radio and listen to opera concerts that played on Saturday afternoons. At that time, there were no televisions, phones, or computers for entertainment. People listened to music through record players and on the radio. I was busy with school and church, but all day long I thought about music. As I learned to read and speak English and French, I was able to make friends with other children.
Also writing an adult version of Violet Archer's life, and you're engaging in some extensive research about her as you're on this writing journey. Were there some discoveries or realizations that you've come to that really jump out at you about her and about her life?
We underestimated how incredible what some of the things she did were, and how daring. Because, for example, she had a hard time finding work in Montreal for various reasons. She thinks it was because she was a woman. Possible. She also went to Europe. She tried her hand at working in the UK, and then she looked for jobs in different places, and everywhere, like, the doors would close. They'd say, "Oh, sorry, you're a woman. If you had been a man, we would have said yes." And so she was just like ready to accept a job. So she was offered some positions in the United States, in Oklahoma and Texas, far from her home, in cultures that were kind of different from hers. And she decided to take them because she knew that it was going to advance her career and help her attain her goals of being a composer. So I found that I kind of underestimated how daring that was to do, especially in the 1950s as a single woman, unmarried. I've read that she had issues over there. Like, people would spread rumors about her because of the fact that she was an unmarried woman. Some of the colleagues didn't want to talk to her or were reticent to spend time with her alone because it would create potential rumors. So it was always more complicated, but she didn't keep these situations from getting her to do what she wanted, but it was always more complicated. And I know it took a toll on her mental health too, very much.
Yes.
And on her physical health, which is also something that wasn't discussed that much, which is like, it's her personal life. But I think even the family didn't realize how much sacrifice she had to make. She sacrificed her love life, her like other desires in life, and her being far from her family for the love of music. So that was something that stood out to me. And I know she had some really hard periods. And then once she found an environment where she felt supported and more free to do what she liked. I know that she really didn't like the bureaucracy sometimes in universities.
Yes.
She found it tricky to deal with that. So once she had more freedom from these things and didn't have the pressures of having a family or whatever people would say, she flourished.
Right.
I feel like, from what I understand, the last few decades of her life were great. So she really, really enjoyed herself, and she would have kept on living and composing forever if she could have.
Yeah. And that was when she had moved to Edmonton to start
Yeah.
teaching at the University of Alberta, where a lot of her legacy started to be built.
Yeah, for me, it underlined how much, if you give a person the right conditions, it makes the whole difference, because she didn't have to face all this adversity. It was blocking her for a long time, and it was hurting her a lot. But once she was in Edmonton, it was tricky in the first few years, but then she found her groove, let's say, and yeah.
Yes, and we're all the richer for it. What do you hope to accomplish by writing basically her bibliography?
So I found a lot of archives about her, and there are a few publications about her, lots of doctoral dissertations and theses that have been written about her, but there's not much that's for a general public. And I've noticed that there's like a renewed interest in her life in those past few years. We used to receive royalties from her, like when her compositions were played, and for years it was getting smaller and smaller, and we decided to give the royalties to the CMC instead. But I realized that these past few years, in my head, the interest was kind of dying down, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's like there's something that's happening even outside of what I'm doing. It's everything is happening at the same time. So I feel like it's a great moment to talk about her. There was even an episode of one of the shows on CBC that was recently about her. The whole episode, yes, it was wonderful. Now I don't have the name of the show, of course, and we didn't have anything to do with it. The family, it's all happening kind of naturally or organically. That there's renewed interest for female composers. There's so many more efforts right now to bring to light these different women. I know there's a movie that's being made about Ethel Stark's orchestra. Violet was a part of that orchestra. I was in the 1940s in Montreal. And yeah, and there's a lot of books that are being published about female musicians, composers. I'm talking to people in different places and universities in Quebec. And one of the teachers I was talking to has recently contributed to a book about female musicians for children. Also, there's some for adults too. So there's this whole like movement right now that I feel is happening that for me confirms that this is what I want to do. And I'm a person that loves research. I think that's something that we have in the Archer family. We love research, we love learning, we're very curious. And I really, really find myself relating to Violet in some ways like that. So this drives my project of making an even more detailed book about her life for adults. Because there's all these aspects that I'm not touching on in her life for the children's version of the book. More dramatic or more complicated, a little bit more suffering that I want to go into in an adult version.
stagger and fall on these stones, are lost in the lapping of water on smooth, flat stones.
Tell me about your personal connection to her and the inspiration that she has passed down to you in, your creative life path.
Yes. So I've always been a creative person. I didn't become a musician. It didn't happen. But I've always been interested in a million things at the same time and tried to find a way to channel it into my professional life. For a long time, I was a content writer for the online websites, which was all right. But now this is the new phase in my life where I want to use this creativity and this curiosity to make things that I like. And so finding Violet as a subject has just been incredible for me. Even if I wasn't related to her, I think I would be interested in her life. It adds another level, obviously, that I have personal connection and that I can talk to my aunts who knew her. It's been very fun asking questions to my aunts about her life and what they knew of her. So there's this whole reconnection with family that goes on with it too. The fact that she also had a lot of archives. She kept a lot of things in different places, so I have to travel to kind of find her. So for me, it's also a very fun experience. I love traveling, so it's bringing me to different places. And I've already been to visit the archives in Calgary. I'll be visiting the ones in Edmonton soon. And I want to go, there's some in Ottawa. I had to search things in my dad's house. And so that's my creative side. I'm a fan of research and I like digging deep into things. So it's just been such a great experience these past 2 years, I would say, because I've been working very slowly on it. And now I'm ready to send it out into the world, at least the kids' book. And then the other project is going to be a long, slow cooking project, I think, but we'll see how it goes.
The good things take their time to cook.
I always feel inspired when I think of Violet and how she approached her own work. It's fun to have a subject that is also an inspiration for not just what I'm writing about, but the way to work with the subject.
This has been Musing on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary. I'm your host, Yana Saylor. Thanks for joining me for this celebration of music, creators, and ideas. To learn more about Violet Archer's music and extraordinary life, visit the Canadian Music Centre's extensive database of Canadian composers at www.cmccanada.org. Musing is a production of the Canadian Music Centre Prairie Region and is heard right here in Calgary and on all major podcast platforms. As we end our time together, we recognize that there are more than 630 First Nations communities across the lands that we now know of as Canada, representing 50 distinct nations and Indigenous languages. In addition, there are Métis in every province of the country and 53 Inuit communities speaking different dialects of Inuktitut across the north. We acknowledge them as the original music makers, dancers, creators, and caretakers of our lands, and they continue to inspire and teach us as we commit to learning and moving forward together. Until next time, thanks for listening and for supporting Canadian musicians and artists in your community.